Hello, everyone. My name is Bradley, and I'm an alcoholic. Hey, y'all. It's an honor to be up here. My sobriety date is April 22nd, 2024. April 22nd, 2024. And, I'm going to come up here and give you some experience, some strength, and some hope. I'm going to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I'm a little nervous. This is my second time doing this for this amount of time. But I prayed for the strength to push through because I know that if I can help one person in this room, then 25 years of crawling through hell is worth it. Because it's not about me anymore. It's not about me. It's about who I can help and what I can add to life now. I brought some visuals here, and I'm gonna go, I could easily go into, a whole hour's worth of what it was like, and I still wouldn't even cover half the bases. It's the typical story. My mother was an immigrant from Korea, and I was a mixed child out the family, and I always had this inferiority complex. Wasn't good enough, didn't fit in. Plus, Dad was one of us, so he didn't show up, a lot. And so it went. My complex started as not being good enough, and then eventually my ego formed, and my arrogance made me better than, But it was always a conscious separation from. But to boil it, it all boiled down to this picture right here. Now, I don't know if y'all can see what's going on in this picture, but I'm going to just give you a little a description. This is me crawling out of a storm drain. And that's the police, the Atlanta police right there. And that day, I'm going to tell you what happened this day. This day I was going to work to do some sheetrock mud. And, and just a disclaimer, alcohol is the only constant variable throughout these 25 years of hell. Now, there were drugs involved, a lot of different drugs, but out of respect for the house, I try to keep that to a minimal. But in this particular picture, it was the smokable alcohol, the kind that you cook with baking soda. And, and I had been using some of that along with my little pint of Taka vodka. And I was supposed to go to work to do some sheetrock mud, and I started ingesting these chemicals into my body, and the next thing you know, I'm hearing the voices again. The voices came back. They would torment me. They would torment me, and they would make fun of me, and they would threaten me. And that day, I think they were saying things like, and I would talk back to these voices. I would talk back to them like, hey, your audio is on, I could hear you, because I thought I was intercepting some signal from a satellite or somebody was watching me, like I was that damn important. But that particular day, I remember seeing a car. It was a car up in the driveway, way up the street, and I was like, man, they're fucking watching me again, and I could hear it. It was like, they were saying shit like, I'm gonna kill your bitch ass, and I was like, how can I hear these people? Like, every time I start hearing these people, and so I crawled into this sewer right here. I crawled in with the hopes of, I'm going to crawl in this sewer and get a head start. So by the time they come trying to shoot me through the sewer, I'm going to pop out the other side and get a head start running. And so I crawled in that sewer. I'm hearing the voices, and they were saying shit like, I'm going to kill the fuck out your gay ass. I said, how did y'all know about that? Because I did all kind of stuff. And when I crawled in that sewer, and I thought that I was going to get out the other side and get a head start running, I crawled in there, and it was concreted shut. The sewer grate. And I crawled in there, and it was concreted shut. And all I looked back down the hole, and I thought they were going to start shooting with a machine gun down this hole. And I said, fuck, I got to go now. I got to crawl back toward where I think they're going to shoot from, right? And in that moment, I tried to turn around out the sewer, and I got stuck. And when I tell you, my heart was beating out my chest, and my life flashed before my eyes. And when my life flashed before my eyes, I saw my son sitting on the couch waiting for me. I saw his mom crying when I cheated on her when she was pregnant. I saw the other girl that I was beating up in the hotel room. I saw my dad overdosed on that cardboard box before they pushed him in the incinerator. And knowing that how mean I was to him and how angry and bitter I was to him, I saw my mom. My mom passed in 2008, and she went through 5 amputations. She was on dialysis. She soiled herself constantly, and you know, I used to be kind of like her personal care nurse. You know, I was her baby. I loved my mom. But how much can you love someone when you love alcohol more? You know, alcohol took front seat, and the substances took front seat. So I would clean her up. I would take her blood sugar. I would feed her, and I'd say, I got to go, you know, do my thing, Mom. And I would do this all the time. And the day she passed on June 27, 2008, the last thing I said to my mom was, I'm not going to feed you if you're going to keep throwing up. Because I had shit to do. And that's what flashed before my eyes when I got stuck in that sewer right there. And somehow or another, I almost broke my neck and made it back into the tunnel and crawled out, and I called the police on myself. I called the police on myself because I need help. I said, 911, what's your emergency? I said, these people are following me and they're trying to kill me. And they said, who's following you, sir? I said, I don't fucking know. I don't know. And they said, where are you at? I said, I'm walking down MLK on the west side of Atlanta. And my shoes was off. As you can see, the shoes are off in that picture. My feet were wet. And I had become the crackhead that I used to make fun of, walking down the street. And I was calling them. I was calling the police. And I called them 17 times because they said, where are you at? You know, stay right there. I said, I'm not staying still. I'm not staying still. And the police, I don't know if y'all ever seen Superbad before, but like these officers were like the Superbad police. I mean, they came up fucking cracking jokes. They knew I was on some shit. They said, what are you on, man? I said, man, I ain't on nothing, man. I just forgot to take my Prozac. I forgot to take my Seroquel. And they're used to dealing with crackheads. And they was like, man, what are you on? And I said, I swear. And they said, watch out, there they go. And they was like messing with me. And I said, man, that's not funny, man. So anyway, they called the ambulance, and I was able to go to Grady. And my selfish ass was sitting in Grady while they're dealing with trauma. Atlanta's fucking busiest hospital. I'm in the bed talking about, can y'all bring me another bologna sandwich? You know, like I'm up in Grady, just selfish and self-centered. Just like, okay, can I have another and another and another? And this was one day. Those days happened all the time. And by the end of it all, I swore I was like, I needed an exorcism. You know, because I felt like the demons were on me. You know, like it was horrible. Like my life was miserable. There were so many times where, I just look back and I've been pistol whipped. I've been beaten. And I just kept living that kind of way. And you know, like I was a sorry motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? Excuse my language. You know, I've sold my body for a hit, you know, and not to women, you know. Let a guy rail me for $25 one time, and that shit hurt. But anyway, I probably shouldn't say stuff like that, but you know, it's deep and it's dark on this quest, you know, like, cause, all right, what happened? Let me see. Is it too early to get into what happened? Let me rewind a little bit. So I started out like most kids, experimenting with marijuana. By 9th grade, I started drinking. And I failed 9th grade twice. And then I dropped out. And about 19 years old, I figured I could drink more if I take a little, you know, bump or two of this other powdered alcohol, you know. And that continued for about 10 years. Maybe 20 years. You know, there were pills mixed in between, a little meth here and there. But, you know, the one you cook with baking soda mixed with that taco vodka, in the end, it took me out. And it took me all the way out. for about, like, when you wake up from a drunken night and then you say, like, damn, how did my shoe get over there? And how did my shirt get over there? And how did I end up over there? And like try to CSI and put the dots together of what happened last night. The last 25 years of my life was like that. It's hard for me to think of a timeline. I can barely remember my 20s. I know I had a son in, like, was it 2010? And then, yeah, that was my 20s, somewhere in there, 26. Yeah, it's a blur, and by the time I finally, accepted spiritual help, I looked up. My mother was dead. My father was dead. My son was a preteen. I was alone. None of my friends fucked with me anymore. Excuse my language, but like, I could go through my contacts, and one of the last things I said to a dear friend of mine before she got, tragically killed in a car accident was, "Can you send me $20?" And I look at another buddy of mine who got choked and asphyxiated and killed in a hotel room, and I think my last message to him was, "Can you send me $12?" So now, I go through and I make those amends now. But anyway, so through all that madness, something happened. Something happened, and there was a fracture in this structure that I built up around me. I built up. I was a womanizer. I was selfish. I was a liar. I was a thief, and I had become a very, like, less than reputable person. I mean, I've been locked up, I'd say, about 15 times. The most I've done was a couple 90 days here and there in Clayton County, DeKalb County. But it was always centered around, like public drunkenness, violation of probation, pissing dirty. It was all, my life was in shambles. I've been in and out of ERs. And I OD'd once, and I didn't know, what I had taken, but apparently it was fentanyl, and they brought me back to life. And even that time, I took the tubes out of me, called a ride, and went back to the dope man. I was in the grips of something more powerful than me, and I never could understand, I never accepted that I was an alcoholic. I just thought, people tell you, you just can't handle your alcohol. You need to stop drinking so much. I'm like, nah, maybe it'll be different this time. But anyway, and this picture right here, it makes me think of no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Bill's step one experience, he still went back out after that. And so did I. Even after this moment where I'm crawling out of a sewer, thinking I'm about to die from a heart attack, and thinking about what a piece of shit I had become, I still went back out a couple times. On Boulder Crest Road, there's a Family Dollar, and this is when it happened. This is when I became willing. It's when the dope man put me out. It's like the dope man turns his back on you. It's bad. He's like, get out my house. I'm not selling you nothing else. I had my little pint to talk about, and I'm sitting behind the Family Dollar, and nobody would fuck with me. Nobody would answer my calls. My brother said, brother, I have a brother and a sister that's still alive, 2 brothers and a sister. And I called David. I said, David, please, man, just let me come to work. I'll work for free. I just need to be around family. I'm broken, David. I'm broken, and I don't know what to do anymore. He said, you go get some help, and I'll think about it. And I thought about it. And I tried to fire one up, and it started raining. And I said, damn it, I'll go. And I said, I'll go to the Bridges of Hope. Now, by this time, I've been to Cobb, Behavioral Health. I've been to the Extension for 3 months. I went to Twin Lakes for 30 days, then sober living, made it to day 52. Went to Twin Lakes again. And then finally, I was like, I'll do long-term treatment, far away from Atlanta. I was terrified of that. I was terrified of being stripped away from my comfort zone. No phone, no women, no accessibility to anything that I'm familiar with. I was afraid of that. But in that moment, I accepted it, and I went to Bridges of Hope for 6 months. It's a 6-month program. And then I agreed to go to sober living in Louisville, Georgia. Bored out my mind. I was irritable, restless, and discontent. I didn't like working for the Mennonite. I didn't like my housemates at the sober living. I just, I didn't like my life. I was ungrateful, because I had everything I needed, just didn't want everything I had. And that was a huge thing. So I ended up relapsing this last time on April 17th. April 17th, I relapsed. I came up to Atlanta for 4 days with $1,400 in my pocket. And in 4 days, I ran my life so low, like I had never felt this kind of disconnect before. I still had material possessions at the end of this relapse. So this couldn't have been a first step experience. But my spirit, I felt like suicidal and like, but too afraid to, I was at the jumping off place that they talk about. I had a little note in here I wanted to read. It had something to do with that. Can't find it. Okay. Yeah, I was at this jumping off place finally. And guess what comes when you're when you're broken? There's a fracture in the foundation and spirit seeps in. And what seeped in was willingness. I was willing to finally do whatever they said. And I learned, what it said, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. And in that moment, that last relapse, they call it research and development for a reason, because in this moment I learned at a gut level concession. Concession means to believe something without wanting to believe it. I want to believe I'm 5'8", but I'm really 5'6", So I finally believed that I was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I was hopeless, and I didn't know what the F I was doing with my life. I didn't know how to manage my own life. So step one was I learned that shit before I got to the Bridges of Hope. Now what happened to me was step two. Step two is glossed over often, but it took a lot for me to come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Where were we to find this power? So I looked. I had prejudices against, this person, this group of people hates this group of people, and all of them are some bullshit, and I was prejudiced. And the set aside prayer, God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about other people, everything I think I know about my own recovery, and everything I think I know about you, God, so that I can have a new experience with myself, with other people, with my own recovery, and especially new experience with you, God. I will repeat that like a mantra. I would ingrain it into my life. So then I started thinking about powers that were greater than me. This is a power greater than me. 2 is greater than 1, so imagine a room of 50. So that's a lot greater than me. Okay, what about electricity? I don't understand how electricity works, but if I stick a fork in a socket, it's gonna fucking fry my ass. Then I started thinking about, when it comes to electricity, resistors and conductors, and how the flow of power goes with the conductors and stops when we resist. I started putting all these little dots together. But the thing that made me come to believe a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, and this is gonna be like out of left field, fucking ants. When I tell you, I was watching the ants one day. I was out there taking a break. We have duties at the Bridges of Hope. And everybody works. Everybody works. You're where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and you're doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to be doing it. So I'm out there blowing, out there on the road and stuff, and I take a break and I sit down. Now my mind is open at this point. I watch the ants. How the fuck does this ant know which piece of dirt to grab, where to take it? How does he know that? Well, let's see something. I found a dead mouse one day, and I set the dead mouse outside. I'm gonna see if the ants know. So I set the dead mouse down. In about an hour, you see you see an ant going into the mice's ear. 2 hours, you see a little line of them coming out his nose. And the next day, the motherfucking mouse is gone. How did the ants know that? They're receiving a signal from something else. You know, they don't have a brain like me. They don't have a heart like me. They don't have a central nervous system like me. How the fuck did they know? You know? And I start finding all these feathers on the ground. Start finding these feathers, right? You know, nothing happens in God's green earth by mistake. So as I'm finding these feathers, now mind you, I'm working my steps. You know, I've come to believe, but this is me coming to believe. So I find these feathers, and this video pops up one day, and it talks about how birds have this internal GPS, and they know, you know, when and where to fly. And it's due to their feathers. Native Americans knew this. That's why Native Americans are very intrinsically connected to the earth. So I started finding all these different feathers and collecting them. I started watching the ants. You know, they say a connection is the opposite of addiction. You know, I connect to you, and I connect to you, and I connect to you, but I also connect to the entire world around me. I understand now that when I breathe, me and the trees have a relationship. You know, or how the highest flying bird comes down to the lowest of the ground and picks up an earthworm, you know, and so like I started thinking about all these things. And I'm just like, well, let me follow the signal the ants are following and just move my feet. You know, one of the things my mother used to tell me when I used to tell her I love her, she said, actions speak louder than words, Bradley. Actions speak louder than words. You tell me you love me, but you make me sit at home and worry about you all night. You don't call me. You know, I believe it when I see it. So, you know, I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. You know, as I understood him, there's invisible forces at work. And something came into my brain frame that night to accept spiritual help. And I followed it. And I went to the bridges, and then I resisted, and I went back out. And then this time I was beaten to a new pulp where, all right, I'll take whatever you got. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And I made a decision to follow that signal, you know, to follow the signal and start doing what people suggest that I do. People who had what I wanted, people who were sober, you know, and people, and it took these speaker meetings. It took these speaker meetings for me to identify, like, hey, that guy used to be just like me, but he's not today, you know. How did he do it? And then they tell me how they did it. You know, you work these steps on the wall. And so by the time I gave my life over to the care of God as I understood him, I dove right into the fourth step. You know, next we launched on a vigorous course of action. So I went in there and I thought about everyone, even to the girl in second grade who laughed at me when I shit my pants, you know. Everybody who has ever rented space in my head rent-free. And that was bad too, Renee. But anyway, I should tell that I ain't gonna do it. So like I dug deep, you know, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of myself, and I love that fourth column. You know, I love that fourth column. Whose fault is it for hanging on to that shit? Okay, they did that. Yeah, they did that. But who hung on to it? Whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? So then I do a fifth step, and I sit there for hours. You know, and I talk to my sponsor. I tell them everything, you know, the crazy stuff, you know, where it's like, and I've told people about 80% of it before, maybe 90, but this time it just all comes out now, you know. We're going to talk about all the shit, you know, because there are things that we hold on to that'll cause us to drink again. And believe it or not, if there's a name for it, somebody's done it, you know, and if that person in particular ain't done it, they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's done it. Y'all ever heard that saying, you're 7 handshakes away from the president? That's pretty deep stuff right there. 7 handshakes away from the president, imagine that. I've met some pretty cool people along my path. I met Bernice King one time. I painted the bathrooms in the King Center when one of my buddies, he had got a contract to paint the Martin Luther King Center down on Auburn Avenue. And Bernice King, Martin Luther King's daughter, came to check the paint job. Guess what? I was high. And I think she knew it. She gave me that side eye. I was like, did I just piss off Martin Luther King's daughter? Oh, shit. But, you know, I've squandered away a lot of opportunities. I've lost a lot of time, but it's all worth it. If moving forward, my past can become my greatest asset. By the time I do my fifth step, and my sponsor goes over all these defects, and there's a list of them. It's like 193 defects on the sheet that I had. Now they all center around selfishness, self-centeredness, fear, jealousy, and resentment, and anger, and all that. But there were some specific ones, like being possessive, being controlling. I was very possessive. You're mine. You're mine. This is mine. Mine, 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 mine. What is mine, truly? What do I own in this life? Even this body is going to go back to the dirt. Even my clothes will be donated to someone else. My stuff, it'll be handed down. All I have is my experience and my story. That's the only thing in this life that's truly mine, is what I've went through. I don't know about y'all, but when I was in that sewer, like I said, this is just one day, but that day particular, I remember sitting there thinking, they're going to find you in this sewer when you're a pile of bones. No one probably ain't going to smell you because it's in the middle of the street. And if they do find you, they'll probably wonder what happened. They'll probably wonder, did someone kill you and drag you all the way through this tunnel? When my family finds me, or finds, when these remains are found, I'm sitting there alive thinking about being dead. And I said, man, that moment should have been enough to wake me up. Giving my lifeless mother CPR, that day when I told her that I'm not going to keep feeding you if you're going to keep throwing up. That should have been enough to wake me up. I remember where I was when I got the call that my daddy got, he OD'd, and I was on Sims Street working in East Point, Georgia. And I'm pretty sure I was twacked out of my mind, but they said, Rockdale County Coroner's Office, is this Clinton Williams? I said, no, man, no, don't tell me that. And he told me, we just, Rodney Williams, he had congestive heart failure. And, I was so mean to my daddy. God bless his soul. I got his ashes on my nightstand now. But I remember calling my sister and saying, he's gone, Jade, he's gone. And this is her half-dad, so she didn't really, she said, Bradley, just try to stay strong. I said, all right. There's a liquor store right there, and I went and I got drunk. And I did that every time. Every person, everybody who's ever passed away, or every tragedy I've ever had, that was my go-to. Whether it was a good day or a bad day, let's get good and drunk. And so I thought about that. I thought about, on that power hour, go somewhere quiet and sit for an hour after I told them about all these character defects I had: manipulation, deception, conniving, abuse. I was real predatory, picking on people I could get over, like never fucking picking on someone my own size, and it's just all in 194. My sponsor only marked out about probably 50 of them. But when I did an honest and thorough search, I went back and highlighted all of them. And, how does myself stop myself from being selfish? I can't do that. What I can do is try to be selfless. And maybe that'll counteract the Libra scales. Maybe that'll cause some sort of balance. Luckily, I was in a setting where you could do that. I was in the Bridges of Hope where there was 70 guys at a time, each one more broken than the next. And, so total, them 6 months plus the 9 months I stayed the second time, that's 15 months. In 15 months, I sat next to and got to know about 11 guys who are dead now. And that puts the shit in a different perspective. Especially someone you think's got it. Oh man, you got it. You're doing big book studies. You're coming in here and you're running sober living houses. Some people carry the message and some people are the message of what we're up against, what I'm up against. They talk about, I think it's in Ephesians 6, it's not against flesh and blood that we battle against, it's against principalities. Also, after that Step 2, experience. We have a Bible study, and he says, be like the ants. He says that in the Bible, be like the ants. You know, it's beautiful stuff. And it all starts coming together. It all starts making sense. The dots start connecting. And then things start happening that are beyond my comprehension. I know y'all have heard of stars aligning and coincidences. I don't use the term coincidences no more because there's something called synchronicities that happen in your life when you're doing the right thing. You know, when I'm doing the right thing, everything in my life seems to fall in place. I mean, they talk about this vital sixth sense that we begin to gain. Sixth sense is extrasensory perception, intuition. You know what intuition means? Instinctual knowing. That's the definition of intuition. The gut feelings, you know, like the ants. It's the sense. I'm guided by something that takes me where I need to be when I need to be there. I was guided to Rebos. You know, I was guided to Rebos, and I'm so happy I came here. But anyway, back to that 7th step. You know, I sat quiet and I thought about all those things that had led me up to this point. All the choices I've made, all the defects that I constructed this little Bradley with. You know, this ego, this egocentric, what do they call it? Egomaniac with an inferiority complex or something like that. So I was just a full of shit Frankenstein. You know, like I've created this guy who just uses people and lies to people and hurts people, you know, and I take drugs and I self-destruct and so anyway, so I think about this me that I've created and all these little defects that I've used over the years that have made this little me. It's like a little demon spawn, and I'm ready for him to go. I said, you have led me, you know, you brought me nothing but pain and misery. I infect everything I touch. I hurt everything. I turn it to shit, you know. And I say that 7-step prayer, you know, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Thy will, not mine, be done. Amen. Start saying that every day. Then we bring up the harms list, you know, and step 8, we make a list of all people we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. We make a list of now, make a list of later, and then make a list of maybe. It says in the 12 and 12, never say never. You know, became willing to make amends to them all. There are some people that I'll probably never see again, but I got to try to find them. Y'all ever heard of that show, My Name is Earl? That's a show where he just goes, and they made a whole series about just making amends. His whole life has become an adventure. But anyway, that's kind of how my shit is now. Like, I shared about it in a meeting the other day. You know, it's like peeling the onion back. I remember the more you clean up, the more it reveals itself in the mess. So I still have amends that just pop up. Like, you know, I need to go find this person. I need to go find this person. And if I push through that fear, if I push through that shame, and I push through that guilt, and I seek to mend these relationships, hey man, this is not an apology, although I do apologize, but this is more than that. This is what I did wrong. You know, how did that make you feel? Did I leave anything out? And what can I do to make it right? You know, this is your chance to free yourself along with me. We're going to free ourselves together of any kind of baggage we've been carrying around. And if you want me to fuck off, then I'll leave you alone and check that one off the list, you know. And that's step 9. Step 10, I was told that it's 1 through 9 every day, you know, or is it 1 through 9 every day. I watch, I ask, I turn, I discuss, and then I help, you know. I watch for these defects, because once I clean up the mess, I'm a hoarder, and I hold on to shit that I don't need, and once I finally clean it up, I make little messes. And I watch for those little messes. And then I ask God to help me clean this mess up. And I turn to another alcoholic and I say, hey, this is what's going on. I invite these people into my life. I invite you people into my life. And I ask to be in your lives because I need you. And I also need you to need me. You know, I need to be useful again because when I was crawling through that sewer, I was useless. But that was just one day, remember? It was always like that. For 25 years, I was useless, you know. Um, I was that guy who would call and see how you're doing and end the conversation. Well, can you give me a ride to, can you send me something? And then by the end of it all, you know what happens when you isolate so much and, you know, you become alone. And I was very alone. And anyway, so I do that step 10 every day, and I continue to take personal inventory. And when I'm wrong, I promptly admit it. Hey, I was wrong for talking to you like that. Hey, I was wrong for being selfish. I was wrong for, kind of gossiping about you behind your back. Because that takes a lot. It takes a lot to fucking own up to the bullshit that I can easily do. Step 11 was a huge one for me. That prayer and meditation sought to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. To this day, I was told that there are maintenance steps. I was also told if it's got a 1 in front of it, you can do it from the beginning. I asked God not to make me sober, not to give me money, not to make me be a better father. I asked God to let me be what He would have me to be. And that's not drunk. That's not a selfish, sorry son of a gun. It's not an absentee father. It's not a lousy friend. It's not a user. It's not a cheater. It's not a thief. It's not a manipulator. And I know that because I've been through the hell of what that feels like once I became that person. I was in hell. That was hell for me. That was my hell. The voices I was hearing, it was in my voice. It was my voice, and it was God talking to me, Sometimes it was the devil, but, anyway, so I sought to improve my conscious contact with God. I got up 30 minutes before I needed to get up. And I sat by a pond, they got a pond on the bridges of Hope, and I sat there on a swinging chair, and I just got quiet. And I just listened to my breathing. I would pray to talk to God and meditate to listen to God. Now, what did God sound like in the beginning? Crickets. It sounded like chirping. It sounded like airplanes flying over. But what happened was, in that moment, when I stilled the waters of my raging mind, throughout the day I can hear God again. Go help them. Go check on them. That guy needs cigarettes. Buy him some cigarettes. But I only got $5, God. Selflessness, remember? And don't give him that $5 thinking that, that street code shit, yeah, just look out for me when you get it. None of that. Give it to him, and God will give you the comfort of not having it because you shared what you had. I think it's Mother Teresa that says no one's ever went without by giving their all. It's a natural law. Once you give, you will receive, but it's not a bargain. I don't give to receive. I give, and naturally I receive. Just like every breath I take, that tree gives me oxygen. And I give that tree carbon dioxide. It's a dance, and it's unseen forces at work. But anyway, so 12. We get to step 12, where they say, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of taking these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. I was fortunate to go to the Bridges of Hope, and I know everyone, isn't stripped of everything and just dropped off in the woods, And I didn't like it at first. But by the time I had to leave, I was sad. Because down there, I learned what service looked like, And I also learned that the result we're going for here is a spiritual awakening. The one result is an awakened spirit. Once my spirit is awake, drugs and alcohol don't fit in. Selfishness don't fit in. I become a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous becomes my life, and Alcoholics Anonymous is the common ground through which I find other people in. And we're all walking in a line towards our God self, towards our highest, best version of ourselves. We're all walking in a line, and some people are walking ahead of me, and some people are walking behind me. All I got to do is find my place in line, get in, and keep moving forward. I guide those who are behind me, and I follow those who are in front of me. And if someone trips on a rock in front of me, it's my duty to tell this guy behind me, watch out for this up here. I become a part of again. And there's a flow that happens. This is a cool thing about this is like a revelation I had. I never heard no one say it, but it was like an epiphany one day. When I thought about this fourth dimension of existence he talks about, the now. Think about when electricity flows, that power, when it's flowing, when it's being conducted properly. What is it called? It's called a current. What does water do when it flows? It's a current. Even the economy has a currency. You know, the current, what's another word for the current? Now. I'm not worrying about what I did. I'm not worried about what I'm going to do. I stay in the now, in the current, and the power comes. I don't know if that made any sense, but you know what? It did to me. It's some good stuff. The word salvation means to come home, and home is where the heart is. You know, I've heard a guy say that the longest distance is from here to here. And when I started listening to this, is when I started to experience that power, you know. I've also heard it said that Alcoholics Anonymous gave to me slowly what drugs and alcohol gave to me quickly. That's powerful stuff right there. But you know, easy come, easy go. And anything worth having in this life is worth working for. If you work for it, you hang on to it with all your might. You know, you hang on. It's more appreciated when you work for it. And this life that I have right now is a beautiful, beautiful life. You know, people don't red button me. You know, they don't block me on Facebook. People are happy when I walk into a room, and that's only through following the signal that God has given me. I've become a channel. There's two things I want to share with y'all before I close this out. And one of them got to do with being a channel. Give me 1 second, y'all. I hope I can find this. Okay. All right, I will share this part, though. Jesus was not a Christian. Buddha was not a Buddhist. Muhammad was not a Muslim. They were teachers of love, and love was their religion. I can't find that other thing I was looking for, but anyway, today, my life is so much better than what it used to be. I'm not a selfish piece of shit. You know, I actually care about other people, and I try to see what I can add to rather than take from. You know, there was a mantra at the beginning of my journey that I used to live by, and it was, you know, make things better than how you found them. And if you can't make them better, stop fucking making it worse. Anyway, I hope y'all got something out of that. I love y'all. Thank y'all for letting me share.